Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an Airbus pilot, and in today's video let's have a look at the radios of the Airbus A320 aircraft. We will have a look at the radios fitted and some of the working principles, and then we are also going to have a look at the controls and indicators on our panel. Now, we're going to start with a little bit of basics. There are two panels fitted into the airplane for each station. Now, we've got the radio management panel, or RMP, that is the top unit up here, and then we've got the audio control panel, ACP, which is the bottom unit. Now, both of these together form the interaction of how the pilots can work on the radios, together with the push-to-talk key at the back of the side stick, and the handheld microphone that we've got located down here next to the captain's and first officer's seats. Now, there are three different sets of units located in the airplane. You've got the captain's set, you've got the first officer's set, and then on the overhead panel you've got a third set which is used by the crew member on the jump seat. Let's say, for example, you're undergoing a line check or you're carrying a pilot under supervision, then this pilot would use the third audio control panel up here in order to make his selections and receive them via the radio that is going to be located here in the back. Now, let's go ahead then with what those radios actually do and how they work. So as I mentioned, we do have three VHF radios on the plane and we have two HF radios. Now, the VHF radios basically cover line of sight reception. In other words, you basically need to be in line of sight of the other station in order to be able to do proper radio communication. When you use HF radios, that is not the case. The HF radios, they reflect from the Earth's upper atmosphere, and therefore they can travel very long lengths, up to pretty much entirely around the world. So over here in Europe, I'm able to receive some Japanese HF radio stations, for example. Now, this in turn means that HF radios are suitable for usage in areas where there is no direct VHF communication possible due to the line of sight limit. Remember, we always have the Earth's curvature, which means that as we fly along and as we make distance from the radio station, the Earth itself is eventually going to block off the signal so that reception is no longer possible. Now, I'm not going to go into the exact details how to calculate this, but in general, you're looking at approximately 200 to 250 nautical miles from the other station in order to make direct radio contact at typical cruising altitudes. Now, let's go over what controls we have in our airplane then. As you can see, we've got two frequency windows up here, and those frequency displays are one for the active frequency and one for the standby. The standby also says CRS next to it, and we'll get to that in a few moments when we talk about the standby nav mode down here. Now, there is one interesting thing to note about this. You can see that when I'm tuning a standby frequency on the left side, it does not change the standby frequency on the right-hand side, even if that is switched to the same VHF receiver. So I've got both stations on VHF 1 over here. You can see the active frequency is obviously synchronized, the standby frequency is not. That means if the captain makes a pre-selection, that is not automatically applied to the first officer's unit. Now, going a little bit further then, in the middle of the two, we've got the button to switch the two over. But that is not the only function of this button. It also tunes the antenna to the selected VHF frequency. The reason I'm emphasizing this is because when we're talking HF radios and you select an HF station active, it does not automatically tune the antenna to the respective frequency, but you have to do that manually. So you have to select the HF radio and then just click the push to talk for once. That is going to make a little sound, like typically it's just going to be a beep signal. And after that, the antenna is actually tuned and you will be able to transmit on HF radios. Now, you have already seen that when I've selected a different radio, like for example VHF 3 or HF 1, on the captain's RMP, the cell light or the cell indicator is going to illuminate. Now, this basically indicates that on any of the three RMPs in this aircraft, there is a non-standard selection made. For example, in this case I've got HF1 selected on the captain's RMP, which is not the typical selection. The typical selection is VHF1. Now, likewise, on the first officer's side, if I go for VHF3, for example, the cell light is going to illuminate. Likewise, if I choose HF or any of these other selections than the standard ones. So standard is always VHF1 on the captain's side, VHF2 on the first officer's side, and VHF3 on the RMP located on the overhead panel. Now, there is one exception to all this. When you're making a radio selection on another unit, let's say for example when the captain wants to tune VHF2, you do that on your own panel and make the selection, and thereafter you switch it back to VHF1. Now, there is one specialty about VHF3, and that is what you see over here. VHF3 can be tuned to a data frequency, which then can be used for data link capabilities. Now, do note that data link is not exclusively dependent on VHF, so even if you deselect this, the plane is usually still going to be data link capable, since it also has data link antennas fitted to it. But that is just a little bit of an extra information there. Now, let's go ahead with the buttons below then. So in the next row, we've got our standby nav units. Now, when we do have a look at them, we first of all need to think about why do we have them in first place. That is quite easy. By default, in the A320, you have the radio nav page on the MCDUs controlling your nav radios. However, in case the MCDUs fail, then you can make standby selections down here on the RMP. In order to do those, we first of all need to activate the nav button, and there is a guard on top of that. So lift the guard, press the nav button, and you can see that this blanks out the RadNav page on the MCDU. Now from here, if you want to make a selection, for example, you go on to VOR, you can either set the course up here, or when clicking the changeover button, you can make your change to the active frequency like this, and you can now tune your VOR, then you can tune the course over here, and like that you've got conventional control over your nav radio, just like in any other airplane, like for example a Boeing 737. So if you ever want to impress the flight simmer, then just show him how you're rotating the VOR beam over here, and I would place money on that. Most flight simmers have just not seen how this is possible in the simulator. Now, if we move on to the other buttons over here, you can also pre-select an ILS frequency, likewise a GLS, or for example an NDB through the ADF, and you've also got the BFO button up here. When you're done with those selections, then be sure to deactivate the nav button over here and make sure that guard is closed again. This is going to bring back the normal MCDU RadNav page, and now the normal way of tuning frequencies is going to be back in operation. Now let's go down to the audio control panel below, and this one has recently caused a little bit of controversy when I said that the radios don't work on the Unibuild A320. Now let's have a quick look into why that is. First of all, we need to understand what each of those buttons does, and then I will explain to you where that little problem was. So we're going to start with the buttons on the top then. And remember, now we're looking at the audio control panel, the ACP, no longer the RMP, which is the unit that you have above. So now we're talking about the audio control panel. So you've got the external transmission keys on the top over here from VHF1 through HF2. And then you've got the internal transmission keys via the interphone and the cabin interphone. Below that are the so-called reception knobs. Now let's have a look into how we would set a panel like this up. Now, by default, you do not have any of these keys selected. So in an optimal case, when you board a cold and dark airplane, there will not be any selection made over here. The background behind that is that in case any radio was selected and you got a stuck push-to-talk key, let's say for example because you slam your flight bag into here and then it pushes the PTT on the microphone, then you do not want it to transmit anywhere. So if there is no external or internal transmission key selected over here and a push-to-talk is selected, then simply nothing will happen. Now, from there on, below that you've got the reception knobs. Now, the reception knobs are rather simple logic. You want to listen to the radio? Fine. Pull out the knob, and now you can listen to the radio. And by turning them, you are going to adjust the volume. And this is where the crux lies when we are talking about the issues I've had on the INI build, so just a small excursion over there. Let me bring vPilot into view right now. So I've just logged onto VATSIM as an observer here as Emirates 3 Alpha. No comments on the unrealistic call time, please. And you can see that with no transmission knob selected, if I just pull out a reception knob, then I am able to receive on that particular radio. So I do not need to select any transmission knob in order to be able to receive something on said radio. And this is basically how you operate those units while you're on the ground sitting at the gate. So you just tune into VHF1 to the active ATC station, VHF2 to the guard frequency 1 to 1.5, you listen to both, and that's it. Now, in order to be able to transmit somewhere, you then have to select the appropriate transmission key. Let's say, for example, the key for VHF1 in order to be able to transmit on VHF1. But I need to emphasize, these are two different units. Transmitting and receiving is not done through the same knob. This is contrary, for example, to the Boeing 737, where you can leave the reception knobs pushed in, and as soon as the transmission key is selected, the 737 would automatically tune in the reception of that radio. On Airbus, that is not the case. With the knob not pulled out, you're not going to listen to anything on the set radio. Now, with that out of the way, we now know how to operate the actual radios of the airplane. Now let's go ahead and have a quick look into a little bit of the HF radios. I told you already that in order to use an HF radio, you need to tune the antenna to the respective station. So let's say that we were now assigned a frequency of 13400, then you would switch that frequency active. You go onto the transmission and the reception. Now putting the reception up is going to bring that famous radio noise in, like that constant sound that you really are happy you've got a cell call system for. And now you just click the push to talk once. Now, this is actually just clicking the push to talk once, and that is going to tune your antenna to the appropriate HF frequency. Now, when that is done, then you can establish your contact with the other station on HF. Now, I just see here on the Phoenix that it actually selects both keys at the same time. That is of course not realistic. You can use HF1 and HF2 completely independent of one another. Now, on the transmission keys, there is a little call light located at the bottom. Let's just bring on the light test so that we can actually see that in action. Now, when you see this, then you can see that there is a call light located here in the bottom. Now, this is in case you receive a cell call. So, when the radio operator sends out the cell call signal and the airplane senses its own cell call, it is going to play the beep sound that you also hear when the cabin attendant calls you, and then the call light down here is going to flash. And that is your indication that you have received a cell call. Then you can cancel that out using the reset key below. That is going to reset the call light, and then you just click on it and you make your call to the controller answering your cell call. Now, likewise, you've got the mechanic and the attendant lights down here. Now, many of you will be familiar with the attendant light from the way the Phoenix A320 works now, where the cabin attendant calls you. And this is exactly what it does. When on the ground, close to the external power panel, the pilot call button is pressed, then you likewise hear the buzzer, and you see the mechanic flash in here. Or if the cabin attendant dials the captain button, then you're also going to hear the buzzer, and you will see the attendant light flash down here. Likewise, you can reset the lights using the reset button, and you answer the calls by pressing the respective transmission key and dialing up the reception down here like this. Now, next up, let's talk about the keys in the lower row over here. So, First of all, you've got that little button over here. Now that is rather easy. If you hold to the bottom, then it is your push-to-talk key, so you're going to transmit on whichever selection has been made on the ACP up here on the transmission knobs. If you put it into the int position, it is going to create a hot microphone on the interphone system. So basically when you are wearing your headset and you want a constant microphone, you put this into the int position, and then you are constantly going to transmit on the interphone system. But be aware that the ground crew doing your pushbacks or the handling agent is also tuned into the interphone system. So there is no separate communication methodology between the flight crew and the ground crew. It is the same system. Therefore, when you are doing your pushback, be sure to leave this in the middle position so that your checklist and all your chit-chatting about the pushback driver's inability to make a proper push is not going to be transmitted down to the pushback driver. Now, as you can see, it is spring-loaded from the push-to-talk position into the neutral position, but it is likewise spring-loaded to maintain in the interphone position when the interphone is selected. From there on, we can move on to the right, to the voice filter key. And the voice filter key is actually one of the more mysterious ones, but it is actually quite easy. So the voice filter key allows the flight crew to inhibit the most commonly used audio navigation signals, such as VOR or ADF. If the audio filter is not active, then you are just not going to see that on light over here. Let's go ahead and demonstrate that. So if the key is not active, then the on light isn't displayed. If you turn it on like this, it is going to suppress anything coming from down here. That's about as easy as it gets. So when the audio filter is active, then the voice filter turns off the ident signals filter that you can find down here. So next to that we got the reset button, and that is simply going to cancel the buzzer sound and reset the call indication that you get up here. So for example, when your cabin crew calls you as they want to talk to you and you pick it up, then you would just press the reset button in order to cancel the flash that you have down here. The next one is the knob for our PAs. Now, Phoenix users will be familiar with it, others might not so much, so just to bring in a quick explanation on this, when the PA key is turned up, then you can simply listen to all the public announcements made by the cabin crew in the passenger cabin, but also made by your colleague. So for example, if the first officer was to do an announcement and you turn on the PA button, then you are going to listen to that as well. Now, finally, we've got the PA transmission key down here, and that key works a little bit different than the other external and internal transmission keys we have at the further top of the audio control panel. Because what this does is basically it's spring-loaded. You need to actively hold it down in order to continuously transmit into the cabin. You can see when I'm releasing the knob again, it turns back off. So like that, you cannot accidentally make a PA into the passenger cabin. Also, the PA key, when held down, includes its own push-to-talk, so you only need to hold this and you do not need to press a separate push-to-talk key in order to be able to talk to the cabin. Now, in the case what we are doing right here, where I'm holding this key down, we would already talk to the passengers. And then when you let go, that's basically it, and the entire thing is over again. Now on the bottom then, we got the ability to listen to the voice idents from all the different units that you see listed on here. So let's say, for example, we tune in a VOR, but for some reason we do not get the identifier of the VOR shown down here. The way this works is the identifier of the VOR is going to show when the airplane has automatically listened to the Morse code, and then it's going to translate that Morse code into letters, and that's what it's going to show you right over here. So when you don't see the ident of the VOR over here, but you want to use the VOR nonetheless, then you got to listen to it manually, pull that out, and then you're going to hear the beeping sound, beeping the Morse code of the VOR's identifier. So for example, something the likes. I didn't learn the Morse alphabet by heart. If I ever have to do this, your charts are going to going to list the Morse code for the station in question. So these knobs you basically only use when you want to listen out to those stations. The only difference there can occasionally be the marker knob down here, because that is by some pilots used in order to identify when overflying the outer marker or the middle marker. Now, those do flash on your displays as well, but in case you want to really focus on looking outside, especially when overflying the middle marker, some pilots are still using the marker key down here. Now, there is one knob located over here that does not have a function fitted to it in the Phoenix Airbus, and in the real-world Airbus, that is the marker associated with the MLS, the Microwave Landing System. And no, this is not your favorite currywurst or your favorite dish that you're getting from your microwave that's landing straight on your tray table, but this actually was intended as a replacement for an ILS by simply being a system similar to an ILS, but with a signal that can bend, so it would be able to fly a precision approach, including a turn on the final. But the MLS never really found its way into aviation and is now being replaced by GLS, and for that reason the knob is empty on the panel we can see over here. Now, this is just a little summary of how the radios and the two associated panels, the RMP radio management panel and the ACP audio control panel, work on the Airbus A320. There is one final button associated with them, and that is the loudspeaker button that you can find up here. Now, usually it's doing very well in the medium or in the middle position here, where you get a nice volume from your radios without completely busting your ears. Now, it is worth mentioning that whatever you hear through the loudspeaker over here is going to be controlled by the knobs over here. So anything you've got up, like for example now VHF1, interphone and cabin, are going to come through the loudspeaker, and that is it. So I do hope this video shed a little bit of light into how the radios work on the Airbus A320. I do hope that you've enjoyed it, and if you would like me to do more tutorials like this about different systems of the aircraft, then be sure to let me know in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. Leave a like if you indeed liked the video, as it does really help out the channel, and if you're up for more, don't forget to comment and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, if you really love what I'm doing, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you for watching, and see you all again on the next one.